Yesterday, I had an experience that I've had several times, several million times it feels like, but it specifically happens when I am in a place where I feel stressed and I'm talking to my best friend who is also stressed. And I want to tie this back and explain what I believe is happening for me as it relates to being raised by two parents who would fit the criteria of disorganized attachment, one of which was my father, very traumatized, although I didn't really grow up with him. My parents divorced when I was 2 and I had intermittent contact over the course of my childhood. It was either wonderful for a little while and then always ended in his rage. Oftentimes not necessarily always at me, but towards my stepmother, but I would be there. So my body was exposed, myself, my personhood, to a lot of trauma around his dysregulation, face turning red, screaming, yelling about literally nothing, like the size of the taco meat, or my stepmother buying a lipstick he didn't approve of when she worked full time. That's another video and story, and as I've shared, I found out at 42 that was not my biological father, thanks to my mother, who I'll get to now. That's like that TikTok, thanks to my mother. But honestly, my mom, I do believe, struggles with some form of undiagnosed and untreated borderline. And as I've begun my journey on ASD, I've asked myself, could there be some traits there? Yes, maybe. I think she might fit possibly more criteria around ADHD with impulsivity, but regardless of that, her inability to regulate and the enmeshment, parentification, and the intensity of that relationship, me being her sole person her whole life until I was 50, is the heart of my trauma. And in fact, as I've said in many videos, I've had as much, if not more, trauma with my mom once I got married and separated from her feeling, I do believe, abandoned, as much as or more than that I can even remember. Obviously, childhood was a long time ago. But what I want to share is how a parent who struggles with some form of emotional dysregulation, relational connection, which is very common in borderline, and parents who may have narcissistic rage, which I believe my father also had borderline and definitely some narcissistic qualities, how all of that can get swirled up and show up in an emotional flashback for me when I'm on the phone with my friend. And we are not fighting. There is not an angry feeling in sight. So before I do that, let me just remind you really quickly what borderline looks like. And I just want to, like I said, reinforce that I'm always talking about untreated, undiagnosed, and we're learning so much about borderline that who knows what all of these origins are. As I've said too, my mom does not have a classic trauma history, but my father did. And so whatever that is, disorganized attachment, which often borderline does meet the criteria for in terms of those attachment patterns, where we have wide swings of anxiety and anxious attachment, I should say, and avoidance. But I just want to remind you what the heart of the emotional and relational conflict and difficulty looks like in terms of diagnosing borderline really quickly. So you must meet 5 of the following 9 criteria. Number 1, a pervasive pattern of instability in interpersonal relationships, so in relationships, a self-image and affect marked by impulsivity. So you're having this instability marked by impulsivity, relational dynamics and self-image and affect it has begun by early adulthood, and it is present in a variety of contexts, as indicated by 5 of the following 9. Number 1, efforts to avoid real or imagined abandonment, patterns of intense and unstable relationships with family, friends, and loved ones, often swinging from extreme closeness to extreme dislike or anger or rejection. That's the cycle of basically idealization and devaluation. I idealize you, you're the best therapist, you're the best child ever. Devaluation, you're the worst therapist, you're the worst person, you're the worst child, whatever. Identity disturbance, which is basically marked and persistently unstable self-image or sense of self. So often not a cohesive sense of self. Impulsivity in at least 2 areas that are potentially self-damaging: spending sprees, unsafe activity, risk-taking, substance abuse, reckless driving, eating issues, things like that. Recurrent SI behavior, gestures or threats, or self-wounding. I'm not going to go into that right now, but it's important. That can be present, and it might not be present at all. So my mom never had that particular criteria, for example. Affective instability. So this is talking about marked reactivity of your mood. So a lot of mood dynamics that can be often hour to hour, day to day. So as opposed to bipolar, where we see like cycles, in borderline, you can see it like an hour ago we were great and now you're losing it. And then we're fine, then you're losing it again. Losing it meaning you're upset with me, I should say. I want to be respectful about that. But the part where it's like you just don't know what to expect, they can change like that. Chronic feelings of emptiness, inappropriate, intense anger or difficulty controlling anger, frequent displays of temper, constant anger or recurrent fighting. And lastly, a transient, that's important, transient, meaning not consistent all the time, that can come and go, self-related paranoid ideation or severe dissociative symptoms, feeling cut off from yourself, from others, from the world, reality, things like that. And I do believe, in my experience, it's often induced, like they're saying, by stress. So like in a fight, for example, my mom would say and do and accuse me of things, and then later, literally, I know she believed it, say, I never said that to you. No, I didn't. And sure, there could be a defensiveness there, but there's a part where I believe that there can be a dissociation in anger and rage that they might not remember. So that's what we're talking about. And both of my parents, I fully believe, have struggled, as one of them is no longer here, with some form of those dynamics, and how that might also connect to the impulsivity, the ADHD, things like that, yes. But the heart was the emotional and relational constant instability, with both of them followed with or ongoing with intense periods of anger, rage, and with my mom, an extreme enmeshment and parentification, wanting me to rotate around her and take care of her feelings, and overexposing me to her adult world and relationships, topics, everything from my entire life. So I had that part, and then I've talked about I had another part where I was left alone a lot as a Gen X kid, as a latchkey kid, as an only child with no family, truly alone, and raised myself alone and was alone and chose to be alone in my room as well. Just want to slide that in as that relates to ASD, and I'm going to talk in another video about what I do believe now could be the impact on a child with some form of autism, with parents who may have struggled with borderline, although it could also be autism as well. But I'm talking about, I just don't think autism it can explain meltdowns and a lot of these things and difficulties in connection perhaps, but it doesn't to me explain the cruelty that both of them could basically put upon me and others. Okay, so that's the thing. So all of that I just described as a child means that I had, and for now I'm thinking about it from my own brain development, raging anxiety, like raging. And it explains my disorganized attachment, where I can be so over-focused and all of that on a person's mood and mind, and yet also be afraid of being close, right? If you think about, forget about ASD altogether. If you think about that is your parent I just described, you learn that there's a lot that you're supposed to do to take care of them, and that their state affects you. So now back to where I was yesterday. I had been to medical appointments. I'd had a difficult day. My best friend is going through a lot of serious medical issues and just a lot of stuff I won't get into. She's really in a bad place. And we've been texting a lot. I knew what was going on, and it was at the end of the day. And sometimes what happens is when I'm really stressed and I haven't been able to sort of have a period of like rest and accommodation and slowing my brain down in between things, like I'm just going all day, I really can struggle with feeling just raging anxiety. And I'm in the car, it's the end of the day, and we're talking about things that we're both like upset about or stressed about, not with each other, in just our lives. And a lot of it is me also really worried about her. And as we were talking, like I felt it's like an emotional flashback. Even though the content of what we're talking about is not bad, it's like you plucked me out of childhood and you put me right back in, or my adulthood with my mom. Every time she went off on me, walked out on me, accused me, name called me, like that's what it feels like. I feel trapped and panicked. And then there's some things my best friend does, which is I think part of the ASD thing, where she's like, there's a lot of sounds, like she'll be doing dishes in the background and it's very triggering for me. And I'll kind of be like, I can't handle that, but I don't know that she fully gets that. So there's like all this other sound that's like, it's grating on me. I'm having these feelings, and I realized that in that moment we were talking, and my phone, I did something with my phone, and then my phone died. And I immediately felt a massive sense of relief, because I didn't want to say to her in this moment, though I could another time say, hey, I need to call you back. I was sort of not really aware of it, but how much the energy when we're both in that state, it's like brings me back to childhood, even though that's the whole point of emotional flashbacks. It's a return or a regression to a feeling state of childhood. So for me, I was feeling trapped, I guess, and stressed and worried and panicked, and I couldn't get it out of my body. That's the whole thing of the trauma living in your body and your nervous system. And I think that I'm very sensitive to sensory triggers. Like I'm saying, I'm driving, I'm trying to pay attention to that. I can hear the noise in the background. And so I just want to share that what does it do when you're raised with a parent like that? That this kind of feeling can happen to us a lot in adulthood, even though we're not even perhaps talking to those parents. Obviously, if you have a parent like this and you call them, like when I used to talk to my mom a lot more often before I went into contact about 5 years ago, I would feel that way all the time if she was upset or unhappy, even if she just wanted something from me. So obviously, if you're still in a relationship and there are not great boundaries or not a lot of things that changed in terms of your relationship, even if they are not mad at you, right? You can feel that way. So it's like basically what I'm talking about is this raging panic that I can get that is like being transported back to childhood. And why does that happen? Number one, because when you have a parent like this, you learn to absorb their feelings, their anger especially, because that makes a difference in how you are going to respond, right? So your whole life and world and safety, emotional and otherwise, depends upon what mood and state of mind they're in. And you just sort of like learn to take it on, right? So this often happens with everyone else too. So maybe what was happening was in that moment, I wasn't having a good boundary in my mind between what she was struggling with and I was struggling with. It was just all in this big pot of like panic and anxiety. Number two, you've learned to be like going alongside this chronically hypervigilant to threat. So even though my friend's voice is not mad at me, she's elevated. I'm elevated. And if you add in sensory issues and hypervigilance, what you've got is a really bad combination of this feels like something bad is happening, even though the content is not there. It feels like a threat. The third thing is, as a result, I believe the core wound of so many of these childhoods for us is that we believe, because these parents will literally tell us we are bad, we are wrong, they will project a lot of their own shame and wound onto us, and or we're exposed to it, so we just take it on. There must be something wrong with me. If mommy or daddy or parent can yell at me or yell at the other parent or doesn't protect me. So it's like, of course, I'm feeling like there's like a shame trigger, even though it, like I'm saying, what we're talking about has nothing to do with feeling shame. The fourth thing is, because with these kind of parents, they often, as a result of their fear of abandonment, will create an enmeshed and or parentified relationship. So enmeshed is really, there's no real healthy adult boundaries. You know, I always say it's like you're like this with a parent. You're like this. There's no real healthy separation. You're overexposed to their world and they bring you into it as a result of whatever's going on with them. And then you often get parentified, meaning like you act in a parent role. Well, you help take care of my feelings, or they overshare their adult problems, or, you know, they just discuss their marriage, their intimate life with you. And you're, like I've said, 8 or 9 years old, right? So you're used to that. So that energy is, I'm maybe getting enmeshed with her energy, but not meaning to in the conversation. And the core is that I have to fix this. I have to make you okay and me okay. And when you're in an emotional flashback, you're not in your full present body. You're back in childhood doing the dance that you always did. The last few things are there are no good boundaries with these kind of parents. So of course in that situation, I'm not thinking about, you know what, you need to, like, this is not a good time to call her right now, even though you're worried. Just text her and call her tomorrow or tonight. Or, you know what, make the call short. Now, I will do these things a lot of the time. When I'm feeling often stressed, I intentionally don't reach out to anyone because I want to manage and regulate myself. And I can take a walk, I can do some breathing, I can do, do work, whatever I need to do. But the whole point of the emotional flashback is that it hijacks us and we don't know that it's coming or happening a lot of the time. So there's no boundaries there, not for her, not for me. And she also has a mother similar to my mother. So you can imagine what that creates, and there's drama with that happening right now for her. And then last few things are that the distress of other human beings, so this applies to now everyone, is somehow my job to fix. I absorb it. I can't set the boundary, like I'm saying. And that dysregulation basically pulls in or makes us more likely or susceptible to a flashback. And now we're just reenacting the trauma, right? So what happened was I felt in that moment with her all of the things I felt when I was trapped with my parents, my mom especially, but my dad too. But it was really a long time ago because, as I've said in many videos, he passed when I was 23. But my mom and I went at it. It was a very complicated, very loving, very intense, very chaotic, very toxic relationship until I was 50. And so basically, in that moment, I'm reenacting it. And the way we work on this is that going back to an ideal situation, like I often do, I would have recognized, slow down, like I'm doing now. You're stressed. Just drive the car, go run your errands, text her when you get home. Play some music right now, sing, hum, have it totally quiet in your car. Set some good boundaries. Do some things for yourself to regulate. Go home and take a walk before you call her or text her. Go, like I'm saying, go do a guided meditation first. All of that would have been helpful. So it really is about reparenting that inner child that's being transported back to childhood by doing all the things that we could not do in childhood. Setting boundaries, being mindful of what belongs to us and what doesn't, trying to lovingly hold ourselves accountable to making good, safe decisions, not just being stuck and trapped, because I wasn't trapped, but in that moment, I felt like it. So those are some common dynamics. I really think that can happen to us more often than not. And like I said, I see this the most when I meet and work with clients who reach out to me, especially in the last few years, who are still actively in a relationship with these kind of parents. And they're struggling. They're trying to kind of separate and set boundaries, but they're not there yet. Or it's not going to work or whatever. We haven't done any work yet. So they're still calling these parents every day because they feel guilty, they feel responsible, there's something wrong with them, or they don't know how to separate. And so they feel what I just described all of the time. And then unfortunately we go home and what do? We get upset with our kids or our dog or our cat or our partner or boss or our employees because we're trying to offload all of that internal dysregulation that we just felt. So it's really important for me, this happens very rarely with my best friend, but in periods of stress, it's more likely to occur when I'm really stressed. But if you are actively still in a relationship with a parent like this is where it's really honestly the most important. So I hope this was helpful. I hope it validates you and reminds you that you have to do things to manage these stories that live inside our mind and our body. And you can be even, like I said, years past and things can be good, but we can truly get transported back. And oftentimes on the surface, it seems to make no sense. But when you start connecting the dots to the feeling state you're having, like where did you feel that in childhood? That's often a great place to start. So anyway, thanks for being here. Please stay safe and well, and I'll see you soon. Bye.